All right. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the weekly webinar Common Ground series, brought to you by PMI India. And I am Monica Mudan Shetty from PMI Pearl City Hyderabad chapter, and along with me, I have Kaushik Srinivasan from the Chennai chapter, and we'll be moderating the session for you today. The topic today is the strength of outcome-based businesses in VUCA world, and we are pleased to have here with us Mr. Kishore Jayaraman, President of Rolls-Royce India and South Asia, here with us for the session. Since taking over the role 8 years ago, he has been instrumental in driving strategic focus and significant expansion across the Rolls-Royce defense, civil aerospace, and power system businesses. Prior to joining Rolls-Royce, Kishore Jayaraman had held diverse leadership roles across the market at GE for 23 years, and his last assignment was as President and CEO of GE Energy South Asia. He also serves on several boards and is at the helm of industry committees and associations while being champion for leadership development and strategic ecosystem evolution for present and the future. Mr. Jayaraman, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Over to you. Just one quick note I missed mentioning. Audience, any questions, please feel free to drop in them on the Q&A box so that we can take it up. We will not be having any slides today, so we'll be having a lot of time to pick up questions. Please do leverage the time that we have with Mr. Jayaraman here. Over to you, Mr. Jayaraman.
Okay, thank you very much, Monica. It is a real pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. And I want to thank PMI at the outset for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. As we thought about what are the things that we need to probably look at to share with you today, to me, what mattered the most was that we should be focused on results. We should be focused on outcomes. There's no better time for us today, and there's no better time for us as we go into the future to be thinking about those. So hence the topic. But it should not restrict anybody from asking any questions if it is even a little bit of a digression from the topic. Having said that, I thought I'll cover it in about 2 or 3 different sort of subheadings. The first one, I want to talk a little bit about Rolls-Royce and what we've been doing for some time now. Over the last 8 years, I've been with Rolls-Royce. Second thing is I wanted to touch base on the new normal. And the third one is the topic itself, why outcomes matter. And last but not the least, I thought we should probably think about how change and outcomes are related and what it means for us as we go forward. So if you're okay with that, I'm just going to proceed on with those 4 topics in my mind. As far as the Rolls-Royce story is concerned, we are in 3 businesses. For any of you on this call who are thinking Rolls-Royce cars, I do not represent Rolls-Royce cars. So I represent the aerospace, defense, and the power systems businesses of Rolls-Royce region. The cars are owned by BMW today, so we just get a nice royalty for that. And we enjoy the benefit of the brand value that we gather from that. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Monica?
Everything is clear. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. I just saw a chat about somebody wanting to log back in, so I thought maybe I'd lost you. Thank you for that. So I think in Rolls-Royce, as we look at the civil aerospace business, if there is a double-aisle aircraft, then you principally are looking at a Rolls-Royce engine in 1 out of 2 aircraft. We own about 50% market share in that. And unfortunately, the Indian airlines today do not have wide-body aircrafts that have Rolls-Royce engines in them. Air India is the only one that has wide-body aircrafts today, and they are powered by GE engines. And as we grow into the future, travel is going to become more and more. Yes, the COVID times have put us behind a little bit. It's a big setback, to be honest. But at the end of the day, India was ready to go international. India was ready to acquire more and more wide-body aircrafts. And so the whole game was going to change for us, which would mean more business, which would mean more services, which would mean a lot of different things that we'll be doing very differently as we went forward. But civil aerospace business, we are in the wide-body aircraft market. In the defense space, if you look at the Jaguars, they're powered by Rolls-Royce engines. If you look at the C-130Js, they're powered by Rolls-Royce engines. If you look at the Hawk trainer aircraft, they're powered by Rolls-Royce engines. This is on the aerospace side for defense. Now, if you look at the marine side of defense, if you look at the submarines, we have Rolls-Royce products in them. If you look at the corvettes, the frigates, and if you look at the aircraft carriers, we have Rolls-Royce products in them. So we do participate both from the aerospace point of view and the marine point of view in defense. Last but not the least is power systems, and there we have reciprocating engines for backup power, and we are also looking at microgrid concepts as we move forward, because at the end of the day, the future is going to be about more and more of reliable power, sustainable power, and I'll touch base on that. So for us, business looks very good in terms of what we can do in India, and we participate in all the three segments, which I cannot say that we will participate in all the three segments of our businesses every part of the world. But in India, we have that opportunity. So we have about 1,000 people based out of Delhi, Bangalore, and Pune. Engineering constitutes most of it, but then we also have digital, and we also have supply chain. So we have a couple of joint ventures. So it's a really, I should say, very lucrative market for us, and it's a short cycle market as well as a long game that we can play here, which means strategy. But it also is very important for us that we are also focused on the topic that we are planning to talk today, or that we're going to be sharing our thoughts together today, which is outcome-based and focus on the results. Now, when we look at the world today, I think it is about a new normal that's coming about. And the new normal is going to be very different. If you notice here, we are here on a WebEx. Normally, I would have done many of these speeches in physical presence in different cities or in different universities or whatever it is. But I have done many of these kinds of thought sharing in WebExes. I've learned a lot about the webinar systems of WebEx. Then you had Zoom at one point in time. Then you had Microsoft Teams now. Then you have GoWebinars, GoToMeetings. So it's all digital. And I think we're going to see more and more of this digital. I think the testament to that is the weak bandwidth that I still suffer from, and I hope that it lasts for the next 1 hour. And but we have to think about how we are going to react to this new world. Working from home is a new normal, so people interactions are probably going to be very different. Travel is going to be very different for business. So how does this world look like, as we look at the future? The world is also going to look at sustainability. The eco-friendliness is going to take more and more of relevance. And I think even in the aerospace segment, which actually there's tons of carbon that is emitted because of the amount of planes flying in the air. And I think all the aerospace companies are very serious about how they want to address it. The fuels are being looked at, the technologies are being looked at, hybrid aircrafts, electric aircrafts, name it, and you will see it. But at the end of the day, that's going to be the new world over the next 20, 25 years. And last but not the least, are based in India. And I think it's not only India. If you look at Asia, there's geopolitics there. There are countries which are becoming more polarized. There are countries that are trying to get more aggressive in terms of territory. There are countries that are getting very aggressive in terms of trade. So I think that is another evolving trend that is happening. And all these trends are changes. And all these trends are mega shifts that are happening in the world today. But through all these different trends that are happening, I think eventually the focus is still going to continue with more and more talent, with more and more technology. But I think there's going to be a heady needed because it's between anyone, whether it be between two countries, whether it be between two technologies, whether it be between two people or the government and the people. So there is this whole COVID situation, I think, has made us question a lot of things that we would have never thought about or questioned before. But also the COVID situation, I think what it's done for us has shown the importance of planning. And I think a lot of things could have been averted if there were proper plans in place. And it is very hard to predict it. But then if you look at 2008, it was impossible to predict 2008. But then after 2008, the world recovered. And we were all cruising along. But nobody thought a virus attack would be this big. And nobody thought that we will be in the situation that we are in today. So having said that, I think it is extremely important that we have to look at a few themes. And I think in my mind, the few themes are going to be the future is about digital sustainability and geopolitics. It is going to be a foundation that's going to be built more and more on talent, technology, and trust. But one thing is sure, I think what we all learned is the pace always has to, the pace always has to be faster and faster and faster. As you can notice right now, the vaccines, the world cannot wait for a vaccine. The world cannot wait for a cure. But what we have found out through the situation is that even though we have all the capabilities of AI, deep learning, machine learning, data, cloud, everything, There's no computer I see out there. Nobody is saying a computer helped us solve the situation. They said that a computer can come out there and it can probably do this zillion combinations for us, and out of the combinations there will emerge something that will show us the way forward. But in reality, what people are still looking for is to figure out how mice can be reprogrammed. Mice can be reprogrammed in order for them to emulate what happens with this virus in the human body so that they can try to find out what to do in terms of a cure and in terms of the vaccine. So we go to the basics. We will go back to the basics. And I don't think we will ever be in a situation where we can look around the corner. Will there be a different epidemic or pandemic or something like that in the future? God knows. But what we can do is that we can say that we have to be worried about change, and we have to be thinking about change, and we have to say change is but permanent. When change becomes permanent, and we all try to look at it and say that yes, change is permanent, and then the question is, what is the best way to address change? So in Rolls-Royce, when we were looking at change, we had a lot of difficulties over the last 8 years, and it's been a constant transformation mode that we have been in. And the reason for the transformation has been manifold, some of them internal, some of them external. And so what we need to do is that we needed to make sure that as we are transforming, we are able to look at it and say, what does this transformation mean? So there is a goal. There is a goal that we want to achieve. And so we go towards that goal. But what is extremely important to understand is that as you reach the goal, what is it that you're going to measure yourself against? And if you don't have a measurement or a result that you say, this is my result, and if I get this result, I'm good, it is very hard to say a success or failure happened. And I think we learned that in the earlier part of the whole exercise of transformation, and we have been transforming ourselves for the last 5 years. And I think more and more we go through this, we start looking at it and saying every transformation should result in an outcome. And the outcome is bigger than a result, because a result can be much smaller, but an outcome has to involve everything, which includes our stakeholders, which includes all the stakeholders, including our employees, the government, the countries around the world. So I think there's a lot that goes into the pot, and as we say that, what does success look like? At the end of this, we should be able to measure it very clearly, and for that we need to know what the outcomes are going to be. It is very, very simple, and we realized early on, and one of the things that we were constantly doing was action-based. A lot of people in the world, and I can say this with confidence across a couple of companies I work for, at least over a long period of time, that a lot of people in the world are trying to look at it and say that actions are great. So I get into a telephone call today, half an hour is gone, and I do 20 calls, my God, 8 hours are gone, I have no idea where the rest of the day went by. But if you all looked at the 8 hours of calls that we did and say that out of these 8 hours, how much resulted in a tangible result or a tangible outcome for even one of our stakeholders, then the world will be a very different place. And I believe that strongly that everything should have an action at the end of it. Every action should have an outcome at the end of it. And every action should always be preceded by a definition of that outcome. And if we do measurements based on outcomes, and if we do measurements which are very clearly defined, and we set the metrics much ahead of time, I think the output we provide to businesses is going to be just tremendous. And that you will find that very interestingly, I have found over the last 30 years in a lot of different scenarios, in a lot of different places, we don't do that enough because we are caught up in the day-to-day activities, and we basically are looking at what do I have to do today? So I got to get this done. But what does this mean in the bigger picture? What does it mean into the overall picture of the company? What does it mean for the rest of the employees of the company or for the rest of the shareholders or the stakeholders? And I think that part of it is always missing. And so I believe that if a company has to go from good to great, for being good, it is okay to have relevant actions. In order to be great, I think it is very necessary to have relevant outcomes. And if we have good goals, it is great. From the goals, we can go to strategies. But from the strategies, in order to go and say that whether the strategy worked or not, I think it is going to be extremely important to have the right metrics, and have the right measurements that we need to all put in place so that at the end of the day, we are able to see this. Now, when I take this and I tie up the outcomes and the changes, so when changes keep happening, and as more and more changes happen, I think it is going to become more and more relevant for us to be not measuring ourselves that with every change, we go about saying that now what do I do with this? But with every change that happens, we should be able to say, now what do I do about it? And when I finish doing what I do, what is it that I should expect? And we are doing that today, if you look at it in Rolls-Royce, because we figured out that in this whole crisis, the flights are not going to be taking off. And if the flights are not taking off and our engines are not flying, we're not going to make cash. And if we're not going to make revenues. If we don't make revenues, we're not going to have cash. If we don't have cash, how do we sustain ourselves? And I think it was extremely important for us very early in this COVID crisis to go back there and look at it and say, at the end of the day, what does it take for us to have cash? How much cash do we have today? How much can we get? Where would we put all this cash? And finally, what does it mean? And how long do we have to, sort of survive this? And it's, of course, changing every month, because every month people say that things are going to be different, but then things are not different. So every month this whole thing changes. So what happens to this whole process of this change and this outcome is that there's a constant feedback loop that keeps going on. And if that feedback loop at any point in time does not close properly, and we are not able to read the signals as they come back, I think it's going to make it very hard in order to measure ourselves. So at the end of the day, when we're able to close all this together, that's when I believe businesses succeed. And in my own personal experience, I used to be a project manager for about 5 years. And during that time, it was very interesting is that it's how easily on a daily basis that we could have gotten into this project management mode, but at the end of the day, never come out of the other side and say that the original goals were this, and this is where we ended up. And at the end of the day, it was one lesson that came to our mind after that particular project. This was when I was in GE, was primarily if the budget is met, then the project will be a success always, because money plays a very important role. But to meet the budget, everything else has to work. And so you have to get everything else in place. And so which means that the schedule has to always be met. If the schedule has to be met, then you need to make sure that the resources are in play, the obstacles are removed in many different forms, which will be from external environment or internal environment. And so changes were permanent out there. And during all these changes, at every change, we kept the goal together, and we said that this project was for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, the original goal, what we wanted to achieve, and what we achieved were really very close. And the only way we are able to do that is every step of the way, keep that goal in mind and say, well, when will that goal be a success? And what is happening on a daily basis at a smaller level? Take smaller things into a bigger picture, back to the constant loops and keep the focus there. And I think that's the only way we're able to do that. So I'm not going to take too much of time just continuing on to say more and more on this topic, as it will be more interesting once we hear a little bit of questions, and from there we'll make it much more interesting. So I would like to leave you with a couple of takeaways, right? And number one, what I want to think about is, it reminded me of Peter Drucker's statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have all the great strategies, but if culture is not there, then it doesn't work. The culture that I believe works, that I've seen work, is an outcome-focused culture. And if you have an outcome-focused culture, then it's going to be extremely easy for companies to improve their productivities, for companies to be able to say that with this particular outcome, every individual knows what they have to do. When the world is translating to work from home, digital media, digital modes of communication, when the outcomes are very clear and outcomes are measured, I think it makes the culture an outcome-focused culture, and that's what is going to be important as we go forward. The second thing I'd like to leave you with is that change is permanent. And I think if change is permanent, if we do not measure ourselves with outcomes, we are basically going to be an action-oriented company, and we'll be a good company, but never a great company. And last but not the least, none of these are easy. And I think it is easier for people to just get lost in their day-to-day things. But it's extremely important that people are able to elevate themselves a little bit above that, and they're able to say that the bigger goal, the bigger focus never changes. The goalpost can change, but it cannot change at such a fast pace that the goalpost change, that feedback does not come in and translate itself into new outcomes that will be clearly measured, and that will be something that will be, noticeable by all the shareholders and by all the stakeholders. So I'm going to stop right there, And thank you. I'll hand it back over to the organizers.
Thank you, sir. That was fantastic. I think you covered a lot of takeaways in 20 minutes. Are you able to hear me clearly? Sir, am I audible? If I can start getting some questions in, Mr. Kishore? Monica, can you confirm?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So a lot of questions coming in. 20 minutes, you covered a whole wide variety of topics around outcome-based. The first question that I have for you is, when we focus on outcomes, there is a need to manage a lot of stakeholder ego. So how do you balance that, right? Because sometimes you get into a meeting with a specific outcome in mind, and then there are people who are going to take you away from the agenda. So how do you balance the various stakeholders that are available, especially for a large part of this audience, we are not at the leadership level yet. So there are stakeholders who are senior to us in the organization who are part of those meetings, and they do tend to derail some meetings. So how do we keep that focus?
Well, look, at the end of the day, there are different kinds of people. And I think, it is part of leadership is to manage different kinds of people, right? And whether you're managing downwards, it's always easier when you're managing downwards. When you're managing your peers, it is some difficulty, but then not so difficult. But managing upwards is one of the hardest subjects, because you need to get to the outcomes, but you need to figure out how to make that happen. And if I were to give you an example, it used to be that I used to be in contracting. And in contracting, we always had this risk perception. And so in the risk perception, it is very important that you have to get these approvals from your seniors. And if you go to your seniors, they have their views of the world with risk based on their experience, and we have our views of the world from our experience. And then when these two collide, the answer is not to put our foot down and say that I'm right, you're wrong, because that's never going to work. But the answer is always to say that, look, I need to still do the contract, so let's not figure out the bigger picture here. And when you get the bigger picture, it is going to be a question of, you've got to get the contract with a customer. At the same time, you've got to get the risk perceptions removed with the business leaders. So you basically have to figure out how to connect these two thoughts together and then figure out an answer. So for every problem or for every challenge, there is an answer. The question is, what is the right answer that both parties can agree on? And so the focus should always be on the outcome. The outcome here is the right answer. And then if the focus is on the outcome, then people are people. And the boss, you say, sir, and the other employee, you can use a name. That doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, all you're trying to focus on is the right answer. And so you should have the right answer in your mind that you can sell to the customer. At the same time, you can sell to your business. So it's going to be very important that you are managing situations. But the situation management can only happen if you know very clearly where you're going.
So, thank you. Thank you, sir. To the rest of them, I'll call them by name. And just linking back to what you said, with this deep focus on outcome-based, and that makes a lot of sense. Sagarika here has a question. She says, with so many changes happening around us, even the outcomes are changing. Yeah. So when do we, and her question says, how do we propose we still work on the basis of an outcome, because the outcomes themselves are changing? Where do you draw the line? What's the balance?
Well, that is absolutely true. So if you look at the outcome as a goal, and if the goals have changed, the business priorities constantly keep changing, right? So when they change, sometimes it is a very incremental change, sometimes it is a step change, and sometimes it is a change that is out in the left field. So in those situations, first of all is to analyze what is the incremental change, or is it a step change? And then that's a feedback that should go into the system in the mind, and the goals have been changed now. So if the goals have been changed, and if the goals are changing every week or every month, I think there's a problem, right? That means there's very poor planning, right? For every single thing, there is an outcome. If it's engineering, they have a program. The outcome is very clearly defined what the program is. If it is customer, if it is sales, then the amount to be sold, that's very clearly said. If it is products or technology, then the technology piece of it, there's definitely outcomes are very clearly defined. And to change an outcome, you don't take an automotive company and say they just switched over to making ventilators. That is a very, that focus changed because of a certain situation, but that's not a permanent change, right? So there's a temporary change there, but there's also a permanent change that happens. And how will the permanent change affect, right, the input parameters? And you'll find in most of the industries, the input parameters are not going to be changed a whole lot, right? The change could be in terms of, let's say we wanted to do $1 billion worth of sales. You probably do less than $1 billion because of the situation, right? But it doesn't mean that you still don't go sell for the sales guy. It doesn't mean you still don't manufacture the product for a production guy. But what has happened now is instead of 1 billion, there is $500 million. The reason why it is $500 million is for a particular reason, but then now you got to look at all the input variables, which means your production facility, which means your cash management, which means your operational capabilities. All these are going to come into play. So now your whole thing is going to change. But it is a delta change, and right now with COVID, I think it's been a step change, but I don't think it is a change wherein people have to go look at a different industry. So that change always happens, and I think that feedback loop has to be very strong. Companies that have the best feedback loops to adapt, and companies that have the ability to adapt in a very agile way are the companies that will survive. Right? And this happens at a company level.
So the biggest thing that I'm taking away from that is you're calling Corona a step change, right? And I think that's a very positive thing to go away from this.
Well, Kaushik, it is a burning platform.
Burning platform. In the IT industry, we say we are in the flight and building the plane. So, but I like what you said about an automotive company reinventing to make PPE devices or ventilators. But here is a question from Spetsy, more close to Rolls-Royce itself, and looks like the future is all about small aircraft. Did Rolls-Royce not miss the narrow body aircraft market segment, or we are going to relook at your outcomes and changes towards that?
Well, look, when Rolls-Royce made the decision that we're going to only look at the large aircraft, it was a very clear decision because we wanted to focus and we figured the future of air travel is going to move in that direction, right? And nobody could predict a pandemic like COVID where the entire world shuts down, right? And even during the financial crisis, there was a little bit of pain, but the world never shut down like this, right? So this is a very different kind of an effect. Now, as we, when we looked at that, it was a strategic decision for us to do the wide body aircraft. And then we kind of now say that, okay, we were also in business jets. It worked very well for us with the business jets. And now the wide bodies, we know what we're doing. We are actually very good at the technology. Ours is the best technology. And so now the next step is to figure out how the new mid-market will look like. And then at the right place, do the right things in order to adapt ourselves into that. So these are all adjacencies that you play with. It's all incremental shifts that happen in terms of the business models. But it's not like a, tectonic shift, right? But what is really important is the future. Nobody knows. As I look at the future sitting here with you all, I think it will be a V-shaped recovery. I can only relate to myself saying how much the need is to travel for people to just go and meet people, whether it be relatives or whether it be friends, how much people look to going for weddings, how much people look to go for holidays, how much the world has actually become a very small place because of the air travel. And so will that all change? The human mind, I don't think is going to change. The human mind is not going to change and our needs are not going to change. I can't see how the recovery will not be anything but a V. And when will recovery happen? I think there's tons of fear. And I think tons of fear is caused by many reasons around. And to eliminate the fear, I think the only answer for us all is to basically look at a cure of some sort or a vaccine. When people stop dying from this disease, I think at the end of that road, we will see that this becomes just like any other disease. And at that point in time, will you see a real big bump? I honestly believe you'll see a very real big bump. Because if you look at the US today, right, the unemployment has reduced in the month of June tremendously. Right? On one hand, you see the reports coming out saying unemployment is going up. On the other hand, you see reports saying unemployment is coming down. Right? But at the end of the day, what is happening is the opening up has created people that need to go out everywhere. This weekend in the US, all the beaches are completely sold out, right? So the need exists, the human need exists, and the human need will drive the recovery. And I'm a very strong believer as the world goes forward. Will there be a need for small aircrafts? Absolutely yes. Will there be a need for the large aircrafts? Absolutely yes. It's a question of the pace at which this change will happen, and the V recovery, how fast will it happen? Only time will tell. And I don't think we are seeing that at this point in time.
Interesting. I mean, and again, with a lot of people, there is a need to have the physical contact and maintain social niceties. So I guess people will travel in the future too. And that brings us to the first question. That one of the first questions that came in was, how does Rolls-Royce strategically align with the Made in India construct that the Prime Minister is so keen about? What's your future thoughts on that, and what's your strategy around that?
So, look, Rolls-Royce has been in India since 1932. Karachi Mail had Rolls-Royce engines, right? And then we had the Air Force first aircraft, the Navy first aircraft, all of them had Rolls-Royce engines. We had our technology transfer agreement with HAL back in 1956, right? And then if you look at today, we have two joint ventures, one with Force Motors and the other one with HAL. Today, we have a supply chain of well over £500 million from this country, right? We have about 1,000 people, give or take a few here. So I think when you look at India, in terms of whether we have a wide sales in India or not, I think the focus is about building India. And in my view, Make in India is like it's like a vision statement. But that vision statement has many meanings for many people, right? I mean, from the government of India's point of view, that is meant to increase the manufacturing in this country, as a result of which the jobs will improve, as a result of which the economy will grow. From our point of view, it is a question of how do we leverage the advantages of India. The advantages of India that we saw at that time was talent. We saw talent that was very useful for us, that will help us grow faster and do things better. We did see cost arbitrage, and so we were looking at the cost arbitrage. That definitely helped us. But we also looked at it as a value arbitrage. Cost arbitrage is to outsource. Value arbitrage is to offshore. And so we've been building captive centers here, and the captive centers are basically looking at how to do systems together. How do you create IP for yourself? And now as we look at the future, look, the way I look at things are that with the geopolitics, I think there's going to be more and more need for aerospace. And I think there's going to be, if there's one thing in India that I believe is essential in order for Make in India to take off, it is co-creation. And co-creation primarily means that you're creating IP in this country. And it could be a shared IP. It could be between India and some other, in this case, UK. It could be two countries, two nations building IP together. And that is possible with our talent here and with some of the advanced technologies and the talents available overseas. The combination is deadly. And I think with those combinations, what we will be able to do is have the products that are made here, and then you make the same products here. So you have to move one scale up to say create in India, and then you come right behind it and you say that I want to make in India, because make in India will be a fallout of create in India in my view. And on long-term projects like in defense aerospace or in civil aerospace, it has to be a create in India concept. Civil is a very high entry barrier space, but defense is a very, very, malleable space.
Yeah, Rolls-Royce does have a long history in India and very iconic as well. You talked about how do we still have a focus on outcomes with so many changes. There is about 7 or 8 questions all around managing change itself and predicting change. Some of it like, how do you predict changes? That was from Maham. Ramesh says, change is permanent. How do we mitigate resistance to stakeholders? And then more importantly, what are the things or parameters that we need to keep in mind with respect to change itself? Predicting always not possible. One more person writes in saying that, Rajan Sood writes saying that humans will never be ready for another black swan event. All we can do is adapt. So what are your takeaways for all of us in terms of this whole handling change, right? The outcome is next, but just when change hits us, or how do we prepare yourself for the change?
Well, we all think we never are prepared for change, but look at us, right? During Spanish flu times, I'm sure people said that this is the end of the world. And then financial crisis, they all said this is it, the world will never recover. And so I think, people are humankind is more resilient to change than the individual minds can ever acknowledge. So in my view, I think every change just comes and every change goes. But with every change, we try to get smarter. But unfortunately, I don't think with every change, we are able to in a very calculated way, try to move towards predicting the next black swan event. And a favorite term that was used by one of my previous bosses was looking around the corners, right? We always assume that the corners are going to be empty when we just try to cross it. But if you assume that the corners might have something, the question is very different. Because then you start asking questions which say, could it be around the corner, right? And if you look at what could be around the corner, then you've taken the first step towards change management, right? And I think when you ask that question and you start thinking about different scenarios that could exist around that corner, then some scenarios are very scary and there's fear. And I think humankind reacts the best when they are under fear. And you will notice that when there's no fear, we are all actually making more mistakes than when we have fear. But if fear also everything becomes just fear, then we'll make even more mistakes. So there's a fine balance between the right dosage of fear, the right dosage of prudence to think about things, and also the ability to say that around the corner, there is going to be challenges as well as profits. And I think when you look at it that way, you start looking at what are the challenges, what could it be? We all thought about it after the financial crisis. We all thought about everything that can happen in the financial world. But what we failed to think about was in the healthcare segment. And now that we have realized about this COVID, for the next 100 years, we'll be prepared to say what will be the next healthcare event. But then where will the next crisis be? It's not something that we here in this call can solve, but if each and every individual thinks about it for each and every situation that they have in their hand, I think the world will be a much better place for them. But that's the best I think we all can do.
Which brings us to an interesting question, right? And this is the whole project management quandary as well. How much time and effort do we plan on change in risk management about things that potentially could never happen, versus how much focus do we give on what's there to be done right now and right here? Like, so you and I could sit all day and plan for what happens if the internet goes down today during this session, or we could just get on with the session, and we did, and we could just get on with the session and handle it. So where do you draw the balance?
Well, look, I think when we are in the middle of project management, right? I mean, usually it is about handling every single obstacle, right? So you look at the next big obstacle that has happened, and so most of the time is spent on what has already happened and how to fix it, and very little time is spent on what is to happen if something goes wrong. So the key thing is to figure out at every single, let's say we are in this particular point in time, and you have 10 activities going on. With every single activity, I believe that a project manager's role is to look at every single activity there and say, what are the things that can go wrong in this activity? And if it goes wrong, what are the things, how badly will it affect the project? And I think there is a matrix that is created usually, which says the probability of failure, and then the effect of the failure, and that multiplier kind of gives you a risk factor, and you base it on the risk factor. So people can go really crazy about this, right? And I've seen people just say that what happens if Harry Potter stories become true in life, right? But in reality, as long as we use to the extent that our mind can expand itself, and we are able to say, this is probably the most probable thing that will happen. There's always a chance something outside of that can happen. But if there's enough communication with the teams, and if the domain experts collaborating with the project manager who is above the domain experts doing the job, then I think that interaction, that collaboration can result in the elimination of a lot of these issues. But to be honest with you, I think just like in career, everybody is focused on the current job. But people always want to have the next promotion. They always look to their boss and say, what do I do next? But if people were able to just say that, what do I want to do? And then say that, what is it I got to do at this point in time to make that happen? It is just like the same thing we talked about the projects. And basically, it just goes into saying that, you know, at the end of the day, it just goes into saying that allocate some time to what could go wrong and be more thinking about what could happen into the future. That's the only thing I can think of at this point in time.
I mean, right now we could use for Harry Potter characters coming into life. One of Madame Pomfrey's magical cures for Corona. So we talked about change, we talked about outcomes, and then there is a group of questions all about the characteristics or the qualities that you require as an individual to make this happen. So one of the questions around it is, what is the importance of emotional intelligence? How do you incorporate seeing the big picture in your team or across the organization? How do you develop the culture of outcome-based work in your organization? So all the softer aspects of how to go from change to outcome, these are the questions. So what are the things that an individual should have as qualities to manage this?
Yeah, I mean, at least in my teams and in all the teams that I've managed so far, as the team leader, I have always looked at it and said, what is the value the individual's job brings to the bigger picture, right? It is my job to ask the question, what does that individual's job mean for the bigger picture of the company? And if you take any single job, you have to be able to explain to the company that there is more value, and the value has to be quantifiable, because only quantifiable means today is money. So if you say you're paying an individual X dollars or X rupees, how much does the company get back in value, right? And some of these jobs are not so easy to measure the value. But how do you take a job that the value is not easily measured and translate it into a value? The constant thing is about numbers, and numbers don't lie. So if we don't translate every single thing into numbers and eventually do the feedback on those numbers, I don't think we'll be able to manage the results, right? And so that is something I have been doing a lot. Even with my teams, as I build the teams, every single headcount that I have to add into the organization, if it is reporting into me, for sure I will do that math. If it is reporting to somebody on my team, they will have to do the math. And then you ask the question, is the individual at full capacity? Is that something absolutely needed for the organization? Then you put that into the mix of where is the organization, right? And this constant thing has to keep going on in the head. This churn has to constantly keep going on. And without this happening, it is going to be very hard to be outcome focused. And when you have this churn going on, soon enough you create a culture where people are thinking this in. Because you're communicating this to people, and the people you have hired, you've said that this is why I've hired you, this is what you're going to do, this is what it means to the company. So I think when you keep doing this, at the end of the day, your whole culture in the organization shifts, because it becomes a state of being. It is already part of the subconscious. People start thinking in those terms. And then we move into the mode where we are becoming more and more productive, because we are constantly thinking about results for the organization instead of thinking about actions for the job.
It does take time, doesn't it, to get to that unconscious competence stage? Because I think a question here was management or even leadership generally start off very well with these kind of thoughts, with outcome-based activities. But as the projects and the deadlines go, and it then becomes output-based, right? It becomes action-based. It all starts very nicely, but then degenerates into a series of things to do and series of deadlines. How do you keep calm around these times, and how do you still focus on the outcomes, especially in case of, deadlines and goals and quarter closes and the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, look, I at least personally, I can share with you that in my life, I've always allocated 10% of time to myself, right? And that 10% of the time is for me. And that is the time I will think about myself, my career, my needs, my family, whatever I want to do there. But the rest, I also need to allocate another 10 or 15%, which is exclusively meant for my job. And what am I doing? Where is it going? What are the deliverables? And be able to separate yourself out from the day-to-day things you have to do. And if people don't do that, it's very easy to get into the weeds. And we will definitely be in the weeds unless we consciously choose to get out of the weeds. Right? And I think nobody can do that except the individual. And any individual who does that is able to handle more breadth. Because when you have this kind of a thing, at the end of the day, leadership is about capability to handle more breadth. Right? The domain experts handle a lot of depth. Leadership is about handling a lot of breadth. And to have breadth, you should be able to focus on many different issues and quickly be able to come to the outcomes you desire out of each and every one of these little domains that you have under you. And for that, you need to elevate yourself above the weeds. You can look for the forest at some point in time by elevating yourself above the forest.
Wow, a lot of things to take away. A few unconnected questions, but I'll start with one. What do you think are the personal qualities that a person or an individual should develop to be able to keep themselves ahead of the curve? What are the qualities that a person should develop, irrespective of which domain, which organization, wherever they work?
Number one for me is humility, right? Make sure the ground is firmly beneath the feet. And it's easy to lose that. So that's number one rule as people grow. Number two rule for me is learning. And I think learning is extremely important. And curiosity is an offshoot of learning. And so the need to learn is number two, very important. Number three, as far as I'm concerned, is legacy. And the wanting to make sure that after you leave the job, people are only going to say good things about what you did is very important. And that gives the pride and passion to do a good job, right? Pride is very important. And in order to have, if you have the pride and you want to have the legacy, then you will have passion to do a good job. These are the top three things in my mind.
Awesome. A few maybe rapid fire questions. Sujoy says, do you think that the pandemic will lead to deglobalization?
Hard to predict, to be honest, but it's already started, the deglobalization, but I don't think the world can survive without trade, but trade will be very different. Trade will be different.
What are some of the things that Rolls-Royce has done to combat the pandemic?
Well, we made sure we have enough cash. We made sure that we have done the right organization structuring. We have made sure that we are focused on the right projects as we go forward because the new normal is going to be very different. So we need to look at what are the technology projects we need to focus on. And I think last but not the least, we are kind of positioning the company so that we don't lose sight of the next 10 years or 20 years. Ours is a very long cycle game in aerospace and in defense. But we also have to look at the short term and the reciprocating engine business. So we have microgrid products, and we're going to try to look at a new space that we're going to create for ourselves and sort of build out on that.
You talked about talent, technology, and trust playing an important role.
So that's what we position back.
What strategy are you following to? Okay. Mr. Kishore, we lost you there for a few seconds. Are you still with us?
Okay, I think I'm here. Can you
we can hear you. I think we lost your video. Would you mind repeating the last one, sir?
Where did you lose me? I'm sorry.
We lost you. I
didn't know where you lost
we lost you. I was asking you what is Rolls-Royce and yourself doing doing to keep the balance between talent, technology, and trust for the future.
Yeah. So look, I think in terms of talent, we have to make sure. Are you able to hear me? Stop me anytime you don't hear me.
We can hear you.
So I'll keep going. Yeah. So I think in terms of talent, we have to make sure that the right people are recognized and the right people have the right work to do and make sure they're motivated enough. And I think that is very important for us, right? In terms of technology, we have to look at the technology as three pieces. One is short-term, today's technology. We have to look at mid-term, which is like, what do we do as we come out of this COVID situation and the world evolves through this thing? What will be the mid-term? And then we have to look at the long-term, and I think the long-term is going to be the next 10 years. What technology should we focus on? When do we start focusing on them? But make sure that we don't lose sight of the longer term as well. So I think that is the way we are looking at things as we go forward, short, mid, and long term.
Absolutely.
And trust. Sorry. I am sorry. I missed on the trust piece. I think in terms of trust building, I think it's very important to communicate with people. So we communicate at all levels with everyone. And the messages have to be a lot more transparent. And the empathy should be there. Someone asked a question on the emotional intelligence. I think empathy to the needs of people has been never before so relevant. I think it is absolutely relevant topic today because people are going through a lot of mental stress. People are going through a lot of well-being issues. And I think being a true leader at this time takes a lot of mental strength to be able to make sure that you care for the people and that care shows to the people and you communicate with people and you make sure you're with people all the time.
So that is fantastic, and I think that's also a great point to end this Q&A session. I would like to thank you again for spending your very valuable time with all of us and patiently answering so many questions that have come from the group. Once again, on behalf of PMI India, I'd like to say thank you. And this has been an extraordinarily thought-provoking session for all of us, and seeing the comments that come in on the Q&A box, I can say that view is reflected by the nearly 675 people who have also joined us today on a Saturday evening. So, Mr. Jayaraman, thank you once again for joining us, and to all the people who have sent in so many questions, thank you for your active participation. I hope we have been able to capture most of the questions that you've asked, and we got a lot of thought-provoking and candid answers today, very similar to the session that we had last time, and this is based on feedback that came from all of you that you would like to have more interactive and more sessions like these where there are a lot of Q&As. So thank you for that. Keep the feedback coming. As we move forward, it's also a matter of great pride that Common Ground as a webinar series is completing its 9th episode. When it was originally conceived by PMI India, we thought of this as a 2-month program to combat the COVID situation. But as more and more changes are coming our way, we are also thinking about how valuable this session has been to so many of us and how we can keep it going forward. So today in your feedback sessions, in your feedback question at the end of the session, you will be asked if you would like to participate in a detailed feedback survey on how Common Ground can evolve into Common Ground 2.0, how we can take it forward into the future. As many of you might know, Common Ground as a webinar series is open to everybody irrespective of PMI membership, and nearly 1/3 of our participants are from a non-PMI background, and we want to see more of them participating. So do share in your feedback with us, with Roger and Priya and PMI through your feedback forms, and it will really help us to structure what we can, and it will also help us to organize more such sessions that are really valuable to all of us. PMI has been doing a lot of things for all of us. Do check out pmi.org/learning. Multiple free courses available that you can take from the comfort of your own houses. There's a lot of new frameworks coming in the form of disciplined agile. For those of you who are PMP, PM Box 7 is out. The sneak preview is out. Take a look at it and see how the PM Box framework is changing. But do look at the essentials for leaders and digital transformation. Two things that we covered in the last topic and today. These are critical areas for our future. And for those of you who are also going to ask a simple question about what the PDU code is, it's on your screens. It will also be sent to you on emails. But I believe that many of us attend these sessions not for the PDUs, but for the amazing learning that we get. On that note, we are going to have a 10th episode and the 11th episode in Common Ground 1.0. Next week, we are going to have a very interesting discussion between two very senior people. Snehanshu Mitra is the head of COE for NASSCOM, and Mark Bloom is the Chief Data Officer for PMI. And they are going to talk about artificial intelligence in project management, whether it's an impending risk or an opportunity. And I'm sure that session is going to be equally interesting as today's. And on that note, I would like to thank you all for joining us on a Saturday evening. Stay safe, and thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you all next week.
Mr. Jaram, thank you again for joining us. Gayatri, thank you for making this happen.
So thanks to PMI for the privilege to be here. Thanks to everyone.